welcome everybody once again to the Merta seminar series. We need to give this a name. Anyone got a good name? But certainly pleased to see everyone here. I expect a few more to maybe show up, but glad you're here. Wanted just to make a brief announcement. The next session we're going to have may be on March 16th. It's not confirmed yet, and we were looking at taking a Saturday for that. And Jan can speak a bit more to that. And we haven't yet got a place firmly established. We've got a couple in mind, but I'll get back to you with the email. If anyone isn't on the email list yet, and you do have an email, let me know and I'll put you on the list. I believe most of you do, though, so you can talk to me after. And I'll let you know probably in about 2 weeks we'll probably have a place for that. And I believe that Jan wants to talk and show some videos with regard to idiot savants, which is the severely handicapped, and how they're able to do things that we can't do. And so it should be very interesting, but Jan will speak to that more. Anyway, Margaret, if you would like to come up and introduce your husband, we can get started.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming tonight. My name is Margaret Merta, and Jan is my husband. And I've been asked to introduce him tonight. I'm not a public speaker, I have to say that. So just please bear with me. I'll try and be as eloquent as I possibly can and to the point. Our friend Frank Milburn usually introduces Jan, as you know, but Frank's at a healing session tonight. He's taking a mediumship course, which is kind of apropos, and he can't be here tonight, so I've been asked to stand in. When Frank introduces Jan, he puts a lot of emphasis on his academic and educational credentials, and so you're all kind of aware of his academic background, and I wanted to talk a little more about the more private person. And so to begin, Jan really became a seeker through an experience that he had as a very, very young child. I think he was about 9 years old. And this experience really shaped and changed his life and set him on a path that he was really never to look back. And the experience that he had is kind of it's a complicated and very interesting experience, and he probably would tell you about it some other time. But I'm just here to say that what happened to him really did change him, and he was sort of set on a path, a spiritual quest, if you will. And he had a lot of questions that he had a hunger to have answered. And so he spent years and years and a lot of his resources and personal time seeking these answers. And sorry, I just lost my train of thought. The quest really led him kind of all over the world, and particularly it led him inward, and he had I think an awakening, an awareness, I suppose glimpses of cosmic awareness throughout the years, and he has shared a lot of his experiences with me, and I have grown considerably through my marriage to Jan and all the years that we've been together, and grown as an individual, and just changed my life completely. Jan is very private, and he in the past has not given a lot of talks and lectures. He did it as a young person, but then he kind of really became more private and really got away from it. And but from time to time, he will lecture, and I know that he's really enjoyed sharing his experiences with the group here in Calgary, and he's really been enriched by sharing. And I think that as he will confirm that with the knowledge that he has when he shares it with people, he basically relives the experience, the situation. So he's kind of relearning and I think experiencing it at a higher level. In any event, he really is. He's my husband, but he's very unique. There aren't really very many individuals like him. His quest, I think, has come at a cost. He's had to sacrifice, I think, a lot of things because of his spiritual commitments and the integrity that he has to a certain way of life. And I think that sometimes it's a little bit lonely and a little bit isolating. But I think that obviously overall it's very rewarding. And especially I think in situations like these where he can be with a very friendly and like-minded group, he feels very enriched and rewarded, as do I. Anyway, without further ado, I'll just call on Jan. Thanks, Jan.
Thank you very much for that lovely introduction. I hope you get better as time goes. Now, Neil, I should probably tell that, I've been asked to wear this thing, I don't know. The guy gives me something to wear when I came in. And now this, is it okay? Oh, I see. I don't know. Well, anyway, today's topic is about soul, nature of the soul. I don't think I thought it very well when I decided to talk about soul, because it's very, very difficult, There is very little known about the soul. And to speak about it for nearly 2 hours, it's stretching one's imagination, but let's hope that I manage somehow. There's lots of misconception as to who we are. Are we just a body comprising of cells, 85 kilos of it, living in emptiness, this very limited short span on its way to become Manura, and that's all? Or are we more? People say we are spirits. And the question is, what is the spirit? And some would say, well, we are living souls. And I want to say, well, what is living soul? So today I would like to somehow contemplate about these things, because there are certain things we can comprehend, and there are certain things which are beyond our comprehension, and we can only conceive of, for example, infinity. We cannot comprehend infinity, but we can conceive of infinity. We can conceive of perfect happiness, but there is nobody who have experienced it. We can conceive of absolute truth, but there is nobody who have had it. When we speak about comprehension, we are talking in a realms of restrictions. The comprehension itself is restrictive because it's based on our senses, on external experiences. It's based on things which are rather very relative. When we speak of conceiving of we're talking in a realms which is much more deeper. We're talking from a depth of our soul. So when we talk about a type of knowledge, actually we can even call it a knowledge. I could say it's a priori knowledge, that means the knowledge, spiritual knowledge is sort of a priori knowledge. It means it's already made, it's been given. We are inspired. We cannot simply create spiritual knowledge. And so today, what I would be saying is something which is more on a level of that type of communication. It's more in a form of announcements rather than in a form of speculations. What I would try to talk about would be a message passed to us through a very high celestial being who are obviously existing in different realms than the material one we live in. And we can either take it or we can leave it. The truth of that magnitude or of that order is really not subject of discussion. It is subject of either understanding it or not, and to grow eventually to its understanding. We do not need to necessarily grasp it right away. It grows, it's like a seed in a depth and darkness within us, in our heart. It grows and germinates, and eventually it might reveal itself. We have to grow to that because it carries its own proof, It's like mathematics. Mathematics carry its own proof. And whether you understand it or no, the proof is there. And when you reach that level of understanding, you would realize that there it was. So the type of talk I'm trying to attempt about the soul, trying to avoid pitfalls of religious, preconceived views and scientific stuff, I'm trying to talk on a level which we can call divine knowledge. It comes from celestial realms rather than from our imaginations. To start, I might be rambling a little bit because I've never tried that before, it's one of these things, talking about the soul is very, you have to transfer it, you have to draw it from within yourself, it's not something you can think with your brain, because brain is external and soul is definitely not external, so you cannot really illuminate that with your mind, with your intellect. You have to feel it, you have to see it from much deeper realms of your consciousness. And obviously, the consciousness is seated in a soul. Super consciousness of man is in a soul. But let's sort of start slowly. I'm just warming up, I'm spinning the tracks, trying to figure out the right approach to it. And to speak about the soul, we have to start about God. Now, obviously, God has been called since time immemorial, since antiquity, by different names. So, depending on a race, depending on a country, and depending on times, people worship the deity, something which they knew was life-giving, love radiating, something what created everything which exists, the lawmaker. And obviously, this God, whatever name you would call it, I'll try to summarize and use certain terms which I will explain as I go, because in order to get beyond the traditional way, we have to sometimes stumble across certain terminology which will help us to grasp it. We can say that a God is infinite entity, omnipresent, omnipotent, omniscient, and he is part of something which, for a better or worse spirit, call infiniverse. Infiniverse is something which is beyond universe. Infiniverse is something which has been always. It's eternity by other terms. Eternity means that it always was and is and always will be in its absoluteness. And so this deity, this God, is a being living in eternity, or existing in eternity. Not even existing, it's a being in eternity. And so everything which we can grasp under these infinite is sort of manifested in that word, God, which in the past people understood much better, and so they never tried to find the right name for a God. They never tried to speak it because they felt that it's beyond our limited concept, and by speaking it we would reduce it to a way which is impossible to then give a justice. Now when we look on a soul, which we heard so much about, I would define the soul as finite entity, which also lives in this so-called infiniverse, or which lives in a sort of state of eternity, but has the same very similar he has a real resemblance to God in quality, but not in scope. It's eternal, like God is, but it's limited, it's finite, as God is infinite. The soul is absolute, and in its absoluteness has all the quality I have mentioned about God, but in a finite rather than in infinite. Omnipresent, omnipotent, and all that. It's not necessarily infinite, but there is a strong resemblance. We can compare the soul to God, if we tried, the same way as if I get a globule of water and I throw it into ocean. The globule would be in the ocean, but it never would be an ocean. It would have the same quality as the ocean, but obviously it would be very different in scope, in size. We can look other terms on a soul. We can say soul is, if the God is a light, white light, then one ray of that one white light is a soul. It's of the same quality, but it is not the sun. It's not the God. It's like unto God, but it's not a God or like God. There are differences. So what I'm trying to distinguish right from the beginning, when I mean soul, I mean infinite entity which lives in a universe in a state of being. That means it's not created. If something is created, that automatically excludes it from being eternal. And for these reasons, the God and a soul are of the same order. That means the soul was not created by God. It always existed like the light within the light. So if the God is infinite and is a big light, the soul is the light within that light. But it's never a part of that light. It's within that light. You know, that's what I'm trying to impress on you, because it would become quite so evident that we very frequently hear people, we are the gods. We are like gods. And what I'm trying to say, well, that's how our mind can conceive it. But when you start to draw on your soul, which is the sole source of the light from the God which shines through, you would know that there are differences. So this soul, which is absolutely perfect in its absoluteness, it cannot be in any way contaminated. It cannot be shadowed, it cannot be darkened, it cannot be corrupted, it cannot be destroyed, it cannot be chopped. That soul always is illuminated by the divine light of God, and it's always aware of that relationship. The thing is, when something is in a state of being, and there are only two things in a state of being, and that's a God and a soul. The moment there are certain attributes which are within this, like God, so is soul, and that's the impulse to create, to express itself. Because expression means existence. So from state of being to move to a state of existence is a step of creation. It's moving from that which is without any dimensions, whether it's time, space, it's eternal, to something which is temporary, because creation means beginning and also means the end. So God, by the desire, by volition from within to express itself, created universe. And that's the expression of God which lives beyond the universe, in that infinite universe, which cannot be in any way comprehended. Universe can be comprehended. Science says universe consists of atoms. That's fine. But it also consists out of infinite consciousness of God. And then there is a other consciousness, and that's the consciousness of man, and that's from the soul. So between the consciousness of the soul and consciousness of the God, we have the all consciousness in the universe. Now, since soul cannot be ever changed, cannot be created, cannot be uncreated, that means that there is a fixed number of souls in existence. No more cannot be, no less can be. They've been always. And these souls are in different stages of expression, I would call it, because when the soul gets this impulse, this volition to create, to know, because until you experience, you don't know. You cannot know that you are immortal until you experience mortality. For a soul, it is necessary to reflect through matter and conquer the matter in a universe before it can be fully self-aware. Even if the soul itself, in its consciousness, has all the basic attributes which we are sort of talking as being sometimes ours. Intelligence, all that stuff. Well, every step, you cannot recognize yourself in its essence if you do not reflect yourself in something which is different. Circle cannot recognize itself as a circle if it is reflected back as a circle. There must be something different, but if you crack that circle, you have made split, and that split itself is a creative act. This split itself would lead to a certain degree of awareness that you are not that what is split. So what happens is when the soul, from the impulse of its own, decides to exist from state of being, which is from ever, forever, without any change, absolute perfection, without any experiences, so to speak. When it decides to exist, it takes on itself limitations. So from the state of absolute perfection, it's become less perfect. So the experience of a soul, in contrary to the evolution of a man, can be called involution. That means that it's getting worse rather than better. It's descending from the highest, lower and lower. And by doing so, it's slowly but surely losing its awareness of its own essence. It's like slowly getting dozy and going to sleep. This is a duality. Everything in a life, in the universe, is dual. The fact that God got awareness, impulse to express, created duality by creating the universe. When the souls have reached a desire to express itself, it's become duality. And that duality is manifested by a split. From the unity, duality, you get a split. There is a lot of evidence from the old teachings that people years and years back understood that whole stuff, And we hear about these super-duper angels, seraphim and cherubs, This highest type of angels is the first split of a soul to its feminine and a masculine side. When the cherub and, what was the other one? Seraphim, I've said, yeah, represent masculine and feminine aspects of personality. And even if at that time there is not whatsoever any embodiment, so to speak, that's why historically these two angels been drawn with just a certain wings and a circle without having any body. There is no substance to them. There is already a beginning of involution. And this continues. There is no gradual jump for a soul to become part of the body, so to speak. Slowly, gradually, soul is departing from its celestial pedestal, from a state of being to the state of existence. And slowly but surely, the matter is become more dense, and the soul is forgetting its own origin, so to speak, or its own essence, because it exists. That doesn't necessarily mean that soul is doing it. Soul, as such, is not change. It's that which breathes from a soul, that expression, that something which creates this duality. Soul never splits. That would be the end of it, Soul cannot be changed. But expression which is manifested through the impulse, through the breath of a soul, we call it spirit. So the breath of a soul is a spirit. The word spirit comes from a Latin word, spirite, or spiritiste. Spiriste, that means to breathe, breathing. And so we have these terms, expire, last breath, breathing, spirit. It's a breath of a soul. And this breath of a soul is that which then is responsible for embodiment. You know, embodiment is a term when the sort of spirit takes over the form, in our case body, and lives through that form as best as it can, because we do not achieve a perfection through just one embodiment. The soul, in order to, you see, there's a great thing about this so-called soul, in a sense that all souls are alike. There is no preferential treatment. There is no such a thing as a bad soul, dumb soul, favorite soul. And because they are all alike, they all have to experience the same conditions in order to become perfect through self-realization, as they are transcending through the matter. And it takes incredible times which we cannot comprehend. But that doesn't matter. When you live in eternity, the time is not an issue. Time is only for us because of our senses and because of the conditions we found ourselves in. So when the spirit descends on a form, that spirit can be the first time going to the form, and then has to conquer basic things, you know. Or it can be number of returns. It's called embodiments. So the soul, and it's not a reincarnation. I will explain the difference. Embodiment is something very different. And the purpose of the spirit is to conquer and to understand, to comprehend the sort of its own essence in relation to the soul. It's to win over the matter, because we come to the matter to fight temptations. That's why we go to the matter. We want to be victorious. As I was saying last time, there's a very big difference between innocence and between victory. Innocence is innocence of a small child who doesn't know. Victory is overcoming the temptations, and also when the soul is descending, is experience, not a soul, the breath of the soul in a form of a spirit is taking over the form. That spirit is subject to many temptations, and spirit is not aware that it's only a fragment of a soul. It's not a soul, it's just a portion of a soul which tries to perfect itself. So this spirit then obviously either wins or achieves its maximum comprehension. That means it conquers. So that the soul has to deal with all kinds of things. The first level to conquer has to be a physical. Now, since, as I've said, there is only finite number of souls in the universe and cannot be ever less or more, because it would be act of creation or act of annihilation, the certain number of these souls would, in certain cycles, descend, so to speak, to that level when the spirit would occupy the form. And so there be a certain group of spirits who would then evolve, and then there be other cycle, and there be other spirits. So it's not that all the souls which exist, you know, would descend. Not only that, the universe is infinite, so to speak. The amount of stars and solar systems and galaxies, you know, is beyond our comprehension. More we're looking into this sort of skies with all these microscopes or telescope we have, you know, more clear it is that we have no forget idea how much of stuff is there. And so imagine that Earth is just a one little small speck, and the amount of soul which comes to this Earth come here for a purpose, because different planets might have a different level of evolution, spiritual evolution. Universe is full of life, and a consciousness is everywhere. This planet, because of its settings, physical settings, is throwing in front of us certain dangers and certain temptations, which we have to learn to conquer, whether it's a snake or a crooked people or pollution, whatever. We do have a conditions to deal with, and we either win it and get over it. So when the first batches of embodiments started, the spirit had to deal with physical. And therefore physical has been considered the most important manifestation in life. To win, physically show the strength, that was everything. That's Hercules, that was a hero because he was the strongest, The other sort of attributes, which are intellectual and moral and spiritual, are much higher. So it was not manifested. People have reflected their existence purely in the physical. Stronger wins, beat him. There was no consciousness of something doing wrong, Victor takes all. So the level of a spirit is determined by the conditions he has to overcome. And so if his spirit young, so can say one of his early embodiments, he fights physical until he conquers this physical, until he transcends that physical and start to have a notion of something which is more than just physical, intellectual, for example. So you have an age of strong physical manifestation, warriors, all kind of things, and then you have an age of intellectual, all Greece and all this, philosophies and all kind of stuff. Something is coming up. So when the spirit wins over physical, and there is nothing more to conquer in physical, in a sort of terminology I'm using, that will be called culminations. So when the culmination is achieved, there is no need to bother with physical. Then the next temptation for a soul to realize would be intellectual. Now these embodiments I'm talking about, if the spirit dies, for example, or a person dies, some naturally spirit is, even if the spirit is breath of the soul and there is a connection, spirit is not aware of that connection. And in some ways, soul and spirit, how I would say it, is like a relationship between the parent and a child. The parent and batch like you, long time ago, and you went through similar trials and tribulations, and in your evolution, you are pretty well sort of vibrating at the same level. So you understand so easy each other from spirit to spirit, and you eventually, obviously, would realize. You see, when you are descending, you are forgetting, even if, it's not lost, it's forgotten. As, for example, when we're going to sleep, we do not remember in a sleep, A, that we've been before we went to sleep, or that we are sleeping. We have descended from conscious awareness to a state of sleep, certain type of unconsciousness. It's only on the way up, when we wake up from a sleep, we remember we have slept. So this is the soul the same way. We do not remember now, nor when we go into a spirit, we remember our previous embodiments, It's only when we are waking up from that imperfections, when our consciousness is reflecting the divine light which is within the soul, which comes from infinite love of God, then we start to realize. But we do have a glimpses, it's called reminiscences. Smell of the flower rather than remembering the flower. familiar to us, deja vu people call sometimes, you know. It's basically that these are the glimpses, you know. The case, for example, was a woman, I remember, I read somewhere, she was any piece of document, and she would tremble and sweat and would be a really song and dance, until it was explained to her through very sensitive individual that in the past, long time ago when she lived, she had signed a document which condemned her friends to death, and it was very wrong, and that fear of realization what she had done has been carried away in this form of refusal to sign any piece of paper, and that. So in a way there is sort of always some flaw in a system, and some people can in some ways then their soul, you know, reflect, you know, through the spirit, you know, see some glimpses of something which was. But all what I want to say is that, contrary to belief, where people, scientists would say, well, you know, really, there's nothing except brain, and everything else is hallucination, you know. You are, that's it, you die and it's all over. Then you get other people say, no, we live, you know, we live in a spirit. That's true, but the spirit is not final. It's not final. Spirit is only a fragment of something much greater. Spirit is not immortal. Spirit, it becomes eventually part of the soul, but it only lives purpose, so the soul can reflect its own existence. And we can have number of embodiments. We are usually dual. That means eventually our counterpart, you know, would join us and become an angel. That's a counterpart. It could be your marriage partner. It could be somebody, you know, which you have never met. But before you reach that final culmination, might be 1,000 years from now, 10,000 years from now, you know, you would meet, you know, so that angel can be created. There are also paternal souls we can call, you know, you get kindred souls and then you have a paternal soul. These are the souls really which are like mothers, you know, or whatever, parents. They try to nurse the soul, because soul itself, you know, when it's descending, is losing awareness, you know, as it's being embodied through existence, and might be frightened. And so these paternal souls would be nursing, would be helping, you know, trying to pacify the spirits, you know, trying to sort of guide in the right direction. And again, you know, it's one of the stage of evolution. So there is quite a sort of array of things, you know, which one has to go through before returns fully home, so to speak. But, you know, you hear people saying, well, we are gods, and all. We never will be gods. We will not be even like gods, because God, to be like means there to be omnipresent, omnipotent, all this stuff. We don't never have this quality, but we have plenty of them. We live forever. That's one thing. We are forever. And we have the same quality. It's like a light of a sun and light of a moon, you know. It's a light, so we'll be as perfect, you know. The soul, which is sort of reflecting itself in a God, is absolute. And there cannot be any flaw or any imperfection. Like God cannot be imperfect, and everything which is imperfect, never reaching. So the soul never is reached by the lives of people who, in a spirit, sort of blew it, so to speak, have not accomplished. You know, just do again. It's like eventually it all comes out in a wash. We are adults, but we were children. As a children, we've done all kind of mistakes, you know. We have done all kind of things. We don't want to be as children now. We are adults. But childhood merged into adulthood, into the man and woman. And it was all absorbed. It's part of our life. It's part of our experience. Good, bad, you know, that's what we are. So it's very difficult to say in this point of time, this guy, he's a murderer. Well, okay, fine, he's a murderer, he's very bad and all. But really, on a spiritual level, he's a weakling, you know, and has to be overcome, you know. But it's a level of consciousness. I said, if you are at the level of physical, then you have no conscience of what is moral, because you have to pass intellectual. So you do things which are appropriate to your level of evolution on a step of conquering this thing, you know. So you bounce back, and there you go, and until eventually it's washed out and figured out. And how long it takes is not an issue, because time and space and matter, it's all very relative. In our perception, when we perceive, we're using our senses, and our senses only can draw from the external. And as I said, external itself is very limiting, it's restricting. In order to understand eternity, you have to actually be in eternity. You can speculate about it, but you never will figure it out. You cannot teach certain things. You cannot teach God. How you can teach God? You can illustrate many ways what a God is, but you cannot teach it. You can conceive of from within your soul, because that's the only instrument, the only soul which is a being in eternity can recognize fully other being in eternity. Everything else is just flavors. It's not, so anyway, so as you can clearly see, that whole issue of souls and spirits and mind and body is rather much more colorful than we tend to sometimes think about it. When we say the soul is damned and all, there is nothing like that. The soul cannot be ever damned. Soul is always perfect, is beyond reproach in any way. It's the shadow of life which colors the perception of the soul. It's like a sun. Sun is shining, but it might have clouds, and this cloud obstructs that sun light. And instead of brightness of a day, you might have a very, very cloudy and very low visibility. But there is still light of that sun causing that you can see, even if it is sort of cloudy and all. If that sun completely disappeared, then you would really realize what happened. So it is with the soul. Soul is shining, always shining. But through the life, through the existence, there is a shadow of existence over that shine, over that light. But it's still getting through somehow, even if it is very weak and faint. You know, if that soul had never existed and that light disappeared, then you really wouldn't realize. You will not be. So what I'm saying is, through the life, you try to penetrate that shadow. You try to remove that veil, so your awareness of you truly are is lived through your experience, understood. That's why I said you cannot understand immortality only through mortality. So the being cannot realize its own essence until it experiences through life that what is, through the reflection. And being cannot reflect itself in a being to recognize itself. It can only reflect itself in through these different manifestations and victories and all, and finally, you know, everything clicks and all. So it's a long, very long process. But we have a whole eternity, so what a big deal. So eventually there is no such a thing as a good guy and bad guy. They are obviously on this level. But at the end of it all, we will be all perfect souls again. And in the process, we learn tremendous amount of things. We will experience tremendous defeats and tremendous victories and richness of existence, not only on this planet, but in a whole universe. And that's why all these embodiments and all. And there is no such a thing as a favoritism. There is no one soul who have it easier and can skip some of these things, and the other, which would have it more difficult, so have to go through it all. Everything has to be the same. I mean, everybody has to start as a soldier in order to end as a general, so to speak. You know, we will have to go through it. Some take it longer, some take it less. But when you look on it from the point of eternity, that's not the issue. You know, issue is that what you start now, it goes with you to a spiritual. You cannot simply improve morally on the other side if you have not started already that improvement now. You can just close whatever loose ends, but you have to wait for a further embodiment to start that retrospective recognition and conquering whatever it is, temptations. So that's why I said, while we're living in this life, we are spirits who are part of something much greater. That something much greater knows about us in a way the parent knows about a child, even if they might not know what the child is up to, might be living somewhere else, whatever, but it's still their child. It's always connected. And we have to try to conquer. Closer we are to conquering whatever it is, whether physical, intellectual, or spiritual, less time it takes for embodiments. Sometimes it needs to be born for a couple of hours. Enough, and it can reflect the life of centuries. You know, there's no fixed time how long you have to live in order to experience. That soul, that spirit knows what is missing. And once that is clicked and realized, there's no point to be in a form, because you want to be perfect. So you can do the other numbers, you know, from physical to intellectual to moral, spiritual, become an angel and fly from there on. The number of these other transformations before you eventually become again eternal being, you know, soul with full realization of what life is all about. And any level you conquer everything, there is no flaw or weakness or imperfection. But you have reflected yourself. Now you know what it is, what you are. Very little. Very difficult to talk about what a soul is. We can talk about what soul does, but it's very difficult to say what a soul is. For that we have to go really deep within, as I said, you know. Try to reflect through the quiet contemplation. That's why always stressing, you know, the more spiritual qualities are more important than intellectual prose, you know, than physical strength. Physical strength is fleeting because it's of earth. Anything which is of matter is fleeting, it's temporary. Even the strongest man would be a weakling at a certain point. Even the most intellectual man would be losing his memories or disappearing. It's all fading. But the moral, spiritual knowledge, you know, and qualities actually grow stronger. Because they come from different. They don't come from matter. They don't come from comprehension. That's the whole thing I'm trying to stress. Anything what we comprehend is because of mind, because of externals. And because of it, there are limitations. There are imperfections. But what is conceived of comes from a soul. And that's different. When you are moral and spiritual, you're getting stronger in that light of awareness as time goes. If you are sort of anything else, and that's why sort of it is so absurd if you have a completion of just one part in some ways, you know, and not the others. If you have, let's say, perfect physical specimen in beauty and strength, you culminated at that level, you just got it, but you are totally stupid without any intellect, utterly immoral individual, it's a travesty. It's not right. It's abhorrent. It's monstrosity. You know, in order for us to be fully self-realized, we have to be equally in physical, conquering intellectual, conquering moral, spiritual, and then we are perfect. We have experienced life of this planet. We are not dead. We're just perfect. There's no more for us to do, but we can evolve further. That's when the angel comes to play, you know. So other vistas, other comprehensions, and just continue. We cannot really try to second guess these things. We, as I said, either accept it or not, either down on us or no. We grow into it. One day, that little seed of information clicks. You say, yeah, I feel it. That's how it is. That's you transcend it. That's what I feel. You know, we have to outgrow. Like child outgrows its own little things, you know, before it becomes, you know, adult, you know, we have to outgrow. Because when you are in a certain stage, you do not know how the hard stage would be. When I was saying, when I was a young kids, I would play with my little toys. And this will be the most important thing in my life. I want my little train. And parents say, go sleep, you play tomorrow. It says, not just a few more minutes, because at that stage of my evolution, that was the most important things in my life. The joy I got out of it, the pleasure, it was much more important than anything else. The war in Afghanistan, whatever, nothing concerned me except that train. If I have an older brother and he would go and with his girlfriend somewhere, you will not understand what a stupid brother it is. Doesn't want to play with train, there he goes, he wants to play with girls. You're laughing, because you would never do things like that. And then one day, suddenly, you outgrow these trains. You lost simply interest in these trains. You culminate it. And suddenly you go and you play with girls, and that's now most important. And if you have somebody younger, it just repeats itself. So as we go through the life, that's how it is. Until we get there, we do not know what it is and how we would sort of feel about it. So it's a transformation as we grow and learn, and all the values will be changing. And that's what you consider the most important, physical, exercising, living forever in a body and all, fails. Stop pruning yourself, intellectual, my God, But one day you realize that there's a limit to it, and that there's something more. You start to feel some within, something is, bubbling, you try to be right. More, you want to live to certain principles. You want to sort of, and that's suddenly that's why people start to gravitate to religion. They're seeking simply that, what their soul or the spirit is hungering for, because there is no clear-cut division. This life you just live physical, and next life just intellectual, whatever. It just slowly flows. So it's sort of from physical become more and more physical, intellectual, and all, and it's just sort of, transferring itself, until you develop completely. That means you burn out all the imperfections, whatever it is, temptation, pride, whatever, world record in weightlifting, whatever, you just basically, and so obviously, not that I'm against, but if you are sort of too much into physicals, and you can see it in sport events we have these days, which is a substitute for gladiators probably, it's an expression of physical. This, for some people, is all life. That's all what they live for. They measure their happiness and existence in a victory of a team or something, Well, this kindred souls, at that level, understand each other. But somebody who is on a higher level, look on them and say, that's fine, but I prefer to read, I say, read, and that's how it goes. And I say, I don't even read, I meditate, I believe sort of in higher values. And so that's how it goes. So when we're talking about soul, we think we are the soul. But in a way, we are not a soul. We never would be a soul. We are spirit, which is the breath of a soul. But that spirit is on its quest for a purpose. He has a certain task, and that is to conquer. In the embodiment, that form one is to conquer whatever he is at that level of awareness, whether it's physical, intellectual, or more spiritual. And that's when the satisfactions come, because when you reach that level, and people say, okay, so you win all the records physically, and what then? And that's the whole question, what then? So you win the Nobel Prize and everything else, and what then, Well, you go further, and it's a realm of spiritual and moral. And then eventually you conquer that, you become like Mother Teresa, whatever, just an example. I don't say that she might have conquered, but just we know her name, and she's been trying so hard. So you get other saints and people we know from history who supposedly have really conquered. Well, obviously they culminate at that level, and then you still exist. What then? And that's this infinite concept of cosmic creation. You sort of evolve, and as you evolve, you change. And you change because you look on yourself as you are as opposed to as you have been. And you might be ashamed of where you've been, and you don't want to be like that anymore. Like you don't want to be any more children, You just become different. And so that's how it flows. I don't know how much I'm doing on time. Well, I'm still Still bound to talk for a bit, but let's hope I sweat it out. But when I read these books, you know, New Age type books, they're full of opinions, you know, so to speak. You know, people shooting things about, you know, indiscriminately, you know, mixing the spirit and mind and souls together and all that stuff, and sometimes giving advices, you know, which truly have nothing to do with what I'm trying to say. I'm not telling you things I've invented. I'm telling you things which came from spiritual realms and been sort of given through the most impressive mediums. And it's only through my study and memory of these things and using sort of that in a very abridged version, because if I had to repeat what I have studied and read about it, there'd be a shelving full of books, and I don't know, I'll be talking probably for a very, very long time. But what I'm saying is very simple. We are all from fragments of a soul. We are living fragments, and these fragments want to make a whole. That whole, in order to realize itself, has to split, create duality, and duality is coexistence. We have a state of being which is prior to any existence. State of being is eternal. There is no change. It always was, or is, and always will be the same. There will be no imperfection, there will be no influence. State of being is simply that. And there are only two beings in existence. That's God and a soul. They've been from ever, forever, forever. That's why soul couldn't be created. And that's why it cannot be uncreated. It's always inchangeable. In relation to the God, it's like light within a light. You know, the little light never becomes the big light, but it's of the same quality, even if not of scope, you know. But it's perfect. You cannot say it was perfect. So the same people say we are God, they don't even know what it means. We are like God. We cannot be like God, because we have to be that. We are like unto gods, you know. But we would realize it only when we wake up. As I said, when you go to sleep, you do not know what you have been before. And when you sleep, you don't know that you're sleeping. It's only when you're on the way up, when you wake up, you can look back and say, oh, I have slept. And you remember your previous embodiments, days before you went to sleep, and blah, 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 blah. So that's what happened to us at a certain point. And that's the realization. And we would be obviously going through that for ever and ever. I don't know how long it takes. I have to say that that's beyond our comprehension. We can only conceive of, you know. So anyway, I can rattle, and I would, but I feel that maybe there might be some questions, because we have about half an hour, and I feel some people want to ask, you know.
You mentioned the difference between embodiment and reincarnation. I was wondering if you could...
Well, reincarnation is based on basically a question of karma, so to speak, and you would have to sort of live again to undo, for example, the imperfections you had in a previous life. You would benefit from that, what you have learned in a previous life, and you have to pay the price for that which you have done wrong. And in a way, reincarnation was created by Hindus, so to speak, as a way to justify the existence of a ruling classes, because they have a caste system, you know. And these guys who lived of these poor people, who they trod upon and called them untouchables and blah, 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 felt they have to give them some reason to endure it. So they said, well, put it this way. I'm having good life now for a simple reason that I had a very bad one in my previous life, you know. And you, obviously, are struggling. You pay the price for... but don't worry, because when you go on the other side, you know, you reincarnate and be much better for you now, because you would pay your price. You know, in a way, in a nutshell, this was the basic philosophy behind theory of reincarnation. Now, reincarnation is reincarnation of the same spirit without any further relationship to the soul. I would look on a soul, an embodiment, as something very different. It's an expansion of a richness of a soul. So, for example, I said it's a breath of the soul, so I'm not saying it's the same spirit is complete finished entity which is just getting better. All what I'm saying is that the spirit is only an extension of a soul. It's like a painter. If I'm a painter, I would paint a painting in 1 year, and that painting enriched me in my skills and enriched me culturally and otherwise. And then next year I might paint other painting, and then do some other creative things. They are all creations of minds, but they are all in a way different, even if all belongs to me. So to me, embodiment, when the sort of soul is like this painting or something, you know, you just sort of do whatever for a soul needs to do, and there is no, as we say, the karmic consequence. You know, you are basically on a quest of perfecting itself in a different levels of matter. You know, you're trying to conquer the physical, you're trying to conquer the intellectual, you're trying to conquer the spiritual and moral, in order that you have experienced the life on this earth from one end of extreme to the other end of extreme, and you have achieved utter control, utter perfection over it. You know, there's nothing to do with guilt, has nothing to do with sort of after you become so-called perfect in a reincarnation, there's nothing to conquer matter or anything. You basically end in this so-called nirvana state, you know, where you are, you know. I think that reincarnation is a very limited shadow of description or intuitive feeling of what really true purpose of spirit is, because in reincarnation you see yourself as a complete entity which is going through life process, the wheel of life, you know, basically grinding you over and over again until you sort of learn from the mistakes, and basically you don't need to attune anymore because you have grasped it. Well, there is, first we're talking about duality. When I speak about the soul, I speak of a complete entity. Entity means just one. And then when the entity splits, becomes, you know, you see, it's a male and female component of a soul, which goes through our experience. If I'm just a spirit, then I'm either male or a female. And I would never, in a way, fully realize, because there's a significant difference where the life is for a male and the life is for a female. In each of these levels, whether it's physical, intellectual, and spiritual. And these two aspects has to be fully comprehended and conquered by both sides, so they can co-join and contribute to the one being, you know. And so I would say that reincarnation is a concept which I do understand quite a bit. At a certain point of my life, I tended to even subscribe to it. I'm a good friend of Ian Stevenson, who's been the best-known researcher in reincarnation. You know, he's the guy who wrote 20 cases of suggestive reincarnation. It's 3 big volumes in India, and Old Souls book which just came out and all. And we've been talking, I've been listening stories from people about reincarnation, and I have read some really good scholarly studies why the concept of reincarnation was put on the market, you know, why it is part of the certain religious credos. And it usually is a guilt side, because you have not started it. You cannot start on other side what you have not started already as a spirit in physical. That's why I say you can only finish that which has been loose ends and all, but you have to wait for a new embodiment. So you be in that stage wherever you are in this world on other side amongst other spirits who be at the same level of evolution, or we can call it, you know, level of progress. And then at certain point, you know, when you are fully freed from any attractions you might have had to all that which brought you to the level you've been in, when all things are closed, whether it's hate, whether it's sort of unfulfilled business of some kind. You can educate yourself, you can reach certain level when you just basically then would be again ready to take form and continue until you fully conquer that which is your destiny, and you have to eventually do it. So like I said, what I'm trying to speak today is not something I have argued in my mind against other concepts. It's all very difficult to speak about just one thing, and that's the soul. And to compare it with something else becomes issue of scholarship, becomes issue of comprehension, and as I said, that already is being limited by our external qualities and limitations, and it would be again not. I'm trying to go to essence, and I'm trying to go from the soul rather than from a mind, because I can speculate any which way. If you give me $20, I can prove to you that reincarnation is exactly the same. And if you give me 25, I might speak differently. Give me 2 weeks and I'll study it and you'll be amazed. But this is not the issue, you see. I'm talking about truthfulness. There is a lot of falsity and false knowledge, which you consciously know might not be so, but you promoting it. The false pride, false humility, false this and that, even if it gives the impression of truth, is very wrong. And so, we have to be mindful if we are evolving as a spirit to have a clear conscience, because that's the only thing which gives us that progress, clear conscience. If you don't have clear conscience, it would bug you. It would be staying with you, and it would be the anchor which would tie you to the lower. Until that's why I say, people say, how do I live? I said, live in a way that you have a clear conscience. And when you have a clear conscience, you have nothing to fear. You have conquered the most important thing, because we don't even know what consciousness is. That's why lots of people do certain things, because they are not consciously, they haven't developed the conscience. And so repentance is basically, suddenly there is some notion of conscience. When we do certain, nobody wants to hurt somebody and destroy somebody if he has a conscience which would feel that it is wrong, and that would touch you in your soul, and it would cause certain consequences. We do only certain things because we do not have within us certain lights. We don't see that connection. And that super consciousness of a soul is not necessarily something we all have reached to that depth that we sense it, We are clouded. As I said, that the light of the soul might not necessarily be shining. It might be obstructed by all kinds of clouds of unknowing. And it is important that in some ways we do have certain objectives in mind, because at the end of the day, life is very, very short, and eternity is very, very long. And really, when it comes to it, I would bet in my life on things which are eternal than on things which are temporary. So I would rather do things which I feel improve my soul than improve my body or improve my intellect. Yeah.
I have a question about soul and God. You seem to speak of them as almost like two different entities.
Yes. But only in scope, because God is infinite, omnipresent, omnipotent. Soul is not infinite, it's not omnipresent, it's not omnipotent, but it's eternal, like God.
So you say the soul emanates from God?
No, it doesn't. It's within God. It's like a light within a light. God is everywhere. Light, globules of water in the ocean is still a globule of water in the ocean. It never would be an ocean. So when the soul is in a God, it would be still always a soul. God is beyond known universe. He is in his own word called infiniverse, which Spirit called, which is a sort of uncreated potential. When the God decides to express, just that notion of expressing itself means existence, and it becomes act of creation. When the thing is created, after that, that creation continues in a form of Genesis. It's generic, you know. But the first creation, Adam and Eve, whatever, so to speak, you know, was of God. But everything else after is a genetics, you know, it's Genesis, you know. And so what I'm saying is that it tends to lead to believe that God and soul somehow are pretty well the same, but they are not. They are beings. That means they are at a certain level exactly the same. And that exactness is in a fact that they are both eternal. That means that being eternal means there couldn't have been ever situation you have not been. You are uncreated. But you can create. But being a being, how do you know who you are? There is nothing created. The only way you can see yourself is through the expression. And that expression is to come through something, which means you have to split yourself through duality. So you are, and then is your creation. And that itself then is never lost. You have done it, it's yours. And then you put life into it. And that life is the breath of spirit. Even in the Bible, they said that God breath, you know, whatever, to Adam, and there he was, you know, made him clay out of clay, and then put a breath of life into it. The breath of spirit is from a soul. And that's why sort of we are basically going through this process, which is a process of purification and perfection through matter, because you cannot recognize your essence until you went through it. That's why through the other side. The duality has to be reflected. That's why I said, if you are immortal, how do you know what is mortal? How you can reflect yourself in immortality if you are immortal? You only can know it through mortality. If you are a good guy and there is no other reference to it, how do you know you are a good guy? Only through reflection. So it's a recognition, and this recognition takes a long time. And because we're talking in infinites, when we talk about absolute in a soul, you have to go absolutely through everything. There must be not a jot of experience which you have not experienced in order to fully realize that infiniteness. But
is there a moment in time when you're able to look back, like when they say when you die, your life flashes before your eyes? Are you able at some point in your time to see how far your spirit has evolved as part of that soul?
As I said, when the life flashes in front of your eyes, it's a memory of your life you have lived as a spirit. Now, and I said, the memory is a recognition of events which happen. The reminiscence is the essence of these events you might not recognize in a memory, but somehow it reminds you of. So the spirit, you know, when, and we are spirit now, we be spirit there, there is really no change. The fact that you lose your body doesn't do anything, because you as a spirit, that's which counts. The body is just, there is no consciousness in the body. The body is not conscious. The consciousness descends and animates the body, but body as such is not aware of anything. When that consciousness goes, body is still there and is dead as a doorknob. You know, you cannot get out of it anything, you know. That was my argument many years ago when that first heart transplant I probably mentioned already, the Bernie Park, whatever. You know, he was a very hard-nosed dentist, no, and he felt, well, you know, I better live with a pump than to be dead, you know. So they gave him this full artificial heart. And being sort of very inquisitive, I was very intrigued by it. That heart is the heart of the matter, and that the soul and everything is in the heart, and when the heart is finished, you finished. So we diagnosed the dead, his heart stopped. That was it. Then the reason why a person dies, because when the heart stops, we have no oxygen pumping through your brain, and so there is no process going on. And so eventually they said, okay, fine, the brain must be dead, you know. So brain dead would be the definition of somebody who died. So I was very intrigued, because when the clerk died, obviously, he died once when they took out his heart, you know, because they put a plastic pump there, no? So they took his heart and circulation started, and here he went, you know, Couple of days, he was doing fine, you know. I remember he was talking to reporters, everything else, you know, he had his big pump next to his bed or whatever. Well, what happened, he was a hardcore materialist, you know. There was no ounce of spirituality in that guy. You know, that's why he wanted to live for any cost, because he felt it's better to live with a pump than not to live at all, because to him, the end of physical body was the end of everything. So he would be able to take anything out of crocodile if he could live with that, you know. But the point was, there he was and he was living. But strange things started to happen. He started to get nightmares. He started to experience things which he called out-of-body experience. He saw himself walking on corridors, and they freaked him to no end, because he never believed in things like that. So I have read some of the psychiatric reports, you know, psychiatrists who studied him and trying to pacify him. It's only, you know, molecules in your brain and all these reactions, you know, getting confused with all these drugs and things and all. But the point was, the guy was going through it. And then one day he died. And I remember very clearly how they reported it. Clark died. His body temperature was 36.5 centigrade, you know. His blood pressure, his pulse rate was about 71 or 72. So I said, well, how he died? If you are living on a machine and your heart is a pump, your heart would be pumping, because it's external electricity which pumps. So at one moment, he was considered to be alive, and his blood pressure was 71 pulse rate and temperature 36.5, and he was alive. And then they said, suddenly he was dead, and all these lights on this monitor showing brain death, you know, when brain death, you know. But the point was that he was so-called dead, but he had a pulse rate, he had a blood pressure, body was pinky because body temperature was just maintained nicely, and blood circulated through his brain. So the brain death was not caused because the oxygen was not getting to brain. He just died. And I asked myself, what really died? The guy has not changed as far as all these machines measuring and testing. In the past, you know, guy died because he couldn't breathe. The guy died because his heart stopped. But here, that was not the case. All that was we consider essential part of life, and when it stops working, we consider one is dead, because we see the body as everything. But here, all that was we consider essential, pretty well was going on, and guy was dead anyway, you know, and that's the whole trick of it, you know, what really died. Could you on autopsy, when you sort of open him, say, well, he had a heart clot, whatever, you know, or there was an obstruction. No, it was all working. One moment he was alive, and then they said he's dead. And that always I say to doctors, explain me what died. You look on it, we are spirit. You can go through the most gruesome amputations. We have now such a skills that you don't need to have legs. You can chop your hands off and you still be the same. You'll be not less what you are. Your personality would be still the same. You can be deaf and you can be blind. You still are the same. You might not hear and all, but inside of you, you are the same. Now, I have shown you, some of you saw the video of people without brain. We always felt brain is so critical. Well, you might not have brain at all, and you'll be as good as new. And now you don't have a heart. So what else is left you can take? You can replace the lungs with a pump. You can replace this with a pump. You can give an artificial larynx. You can give an extra stomach. You can just make living being from bits and pieces and be still the same, even if he has no brain. But when that goes, you can have these all things together and there'll be no life in it. So what is the life? What is the spirit? That's what I'm trying to bring to your attention. You have to think deeper than just what you hear and what it's easy to sort of digest. Usually, you know, there is more into it. I'm looking deeper than just what meets the eye, what triggers the brain. Yeah.
Does a person choose their time or have some kind of say in when they die? Like, for example, if somebody's fighting a major illness?
Yes.
Do we have some choice in how long we stay here?
Now, you know, I think that this is all, again, a relationship between how well you are aware of yourself as a spirit, or how unaware you are that you are spirit. In the past, people were much more in contact with the spiritual side of theirs, you know. It's only materialism which has changed this approach. So when you look, there is a book written by a French scholar, I forgot the name of it, but it's a classic. And what he did, he was going through all his cemeteries in France, you know, and he was looking on people when they died, you know, and then he would take a record of it and then went into sort of chronicles and try to find, you know, a relationship between whether they knew when they died and whether they sort of just died. And he found, and he showed all the statistics from anecdotal evidence, from interview of relatives and people who knew them and all, that in the past, even on tombstone is written, Benedict is dead and all, Swedenborg, all kind of, there are lots of records. People knew pretty well the time was come. And they would put their affairs in order. They would call their friends and families to say their last goodbyes. They knew they would die, and they usually died exactly as they predicted. But as the modern times encroach on us, as we started to be more and more sort of corrupted by this so-called, not only philosophy, but a way of life, we have lost that internal instinct, and then we are totally irresponsible as far as our bodies are. We have abdicated most of us our responsibility, both for the spirit, for the mind, and for the body, to the hands of so-called experts. So we have lost this instinct because we rely on so-called sound judgment of somebody else. Doctor told me, you know, and then he's surprised it didn't work out or whatever. But if you look into a certain sort of like races, you know, like more simple ones, you know, the knowing when the death would come was not a surprising phenomenon. Actually, remember that movie Moby Dick, when that Indian fellow at a certain point decided to make himself a coffin, and nobody could, you know, stop him doing it because he knew he would basically die. And they said, no, 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 there's no way, you know, you are strong and everything. And he said, no, when I do that coffin up, and sure enough, he died. You know, all what I'm saying that we could know that, you know, sometimes we can control our death to the point when we feel satisfied that things which needed to be accomplished are done. You have cases, for example, the mother would hang on until her daughter gets married because or gave a birth, and when that happens, there she goes, you know. There are many cases of these emotional ties. When this is all sorted out, people would go, but it's become rare. But when you start seeing yourself more as a spirit, the spirit is immortal. Your control over your body is much more than in your own court, you know. There are people who can do it with ease, you know. That's why we have the schools, out-of-body experiences, you know, Munro Institute and all.
An illness, a major illness, if you thought it bump you up to a higher consciousness or make you more aware in some way, because I just noticed the changes in perception of me as a person when I was diagnosed and only given so long, and I've lived past that. So I'm questioning now, because there was some kind of inner knowing that something was going on.
Sure.
I almost felt that I was in communication with people who had gone before me.
Absolutely.
But I was fighting to stay here, and the warfare still goes on sometimes. So I'm kind of wondering what took place with that illness, what it did to me.
Well, when you get illness, you're losing your physical and you strengthening your spiritual. Spirit is getting freer, is freeing itself, you know, and as the spirit freeing itself from the matter, from the pull of the body, is getting more and more in touch with the other realities of other spirits. That's why many people who are very ill or dying suddenly start talking to invisible people in a room, seeing their relatives, you know, stretching their hands, making comments. If you read the books of the last words, you will be amazed what famous people had to say on their deathbeds in the moment of passing. You know, the recognition, suddenly repentance of certain beliefs and all, because suddenly they saw the different realities. We do not know we are even spirit. I'm even surprised you listen to me, because we are all bodies, you know. I mean, what else? If you want to be a scientist, you know, you'll be excommunicated from the science the moment you would say that you believe in what I'm trying to lecture, you know, or to tell you about, because this is the sort of time we live in, you know, but we are interested about truth, not about agreed upon sort of...
What about walk-ins? Do you know about those?
Well, you know, this is a term which came through sort of, you know, Ruth Montgomery and some other peoples. I do not dispute that there might be a possibility that one spirit in a body can be replaced with the other spirit. I would say, what is a case of possession? Case of possession is basically defined that existing body, existing person is suddenly possessed by entity, by a spirit who might not be even aware that he is dead. And through the body is then trying to live its own reality. You know, Dr. Rishi in his book, you know, Tomorrow, whatever it's called, you know, described that very clearly when he died, and then, you know, he was sort of traveling in a spirit through the realms, and he could see, you know, these spirits, you know, because what you are, you are. If you are a drug addict now, it's not the body which is addicted, it's your spirit. If you are alcoholic now, it's not your body which is addicted, it's the spirit. So these people who, for example, alcoholic on earth, they still have a desire for alcohol. The effect is on a spirit, on a soul, not on a soul, on a spirit. And so, because they have no body, they cannot experience it. So what they're doing, they're hanging in these bars and pubs and waiting on people. When they get rid of intoxicated, they can jump in and get a free drink. You know, that's why, you know, lots of people lose this, change their personalities. Few drinks and from a nice guy is a total lunatic, you know, because he picks that personality. Usually when he's sober, spirit goes, but sometimes can stag in. So walking is a permanent type of possession, usually when the spirit, you know, is either weaker and overwhelmed, or body might be sort of quickly switching between one spirit leaving and another, jumping in before, as we say, get cold. You know, I don't know, I've never really paid that attention to it, but everything is possible.
We all have soul.
Yes.
And we all have one or more spirits, or do the spirits come and go?
No, we don't. Eventually we are always part of the soul. It's like a child is a part of the parent. Even if they are separated, and children might not know about their parents, where they might be. Sometimes they don't even know whether they are still alive or they are dead. They are still in that relationship of parent or child. There is that bond which would always exist. Now, as a spirit, the soul does not create 20, 40, 50 spirits. What it does in a split, eventually, you get a spirit which is female, gender, and the spirit which is male. And they go through the process of existence. And they would basically trying to purify itself through that existence on earth in different stages, the physical, the intellectual, and spiritual. So you start on a low bottom in a physical, so you have no conscience, you know, you have no intellect, you just eat and kill and exist, you know, basic life, you worship the strength, victor takes all, this type of stuff, you know. Then you transcend, you're evolving. When you start evolving, that means you physically become less important. You suddenly realize that there is more to life, as we say, than meets the eye. You start reading the books, you start to converse, you develop the language, you start to, and this is fine, but you can still have totally immoral, you know, you have no conscience of what's right or wrong, you know, you can speak nicely, but that's all, but you can behave very badly. Eventually it starts growing on you, and maybe there is more into it than just brain, you know, the intellectual, and that's the evolution. But we don't know what our ultimum limit until we conquer. We do not know how far. As I said, you can only know it when you are on the top. If you are a world record holder in 100 meters dash, you are there. You know, you can ask, what more? You have conquered. There is no need to repeat that 100 meters all the time. You will never be better because you have conquered, you have reached the maximum. So you look for something else. And that's what I'm saying. The soul wants to realize itself through existence. Soul itself doesn't enter into existence. Yes, it's just in a state of being, beyond. But the reflection of that soul, the breath of it, manifests. And then when it all clicks, it reflects, and the soul, anyway.
So, with soul in its
The spirit is created from a soul, you know, spirit, and the spirit lives. Spirit has no awareness of being, let's say, part of the soul.
But if you want to conquer something, the soul wants to conquer something, let's say it's physical,
Yes.
then it creates a life that is going to...
Yes, it goes, the impetus always comes from the spirit, from the soul. So like I said, soul is a source of volition, desire, the impulse, it is a source of love, it's a source of consciousness, and all then permeates through the spirit. But then spirit is in a way unaware of that link. And that's if you are aware of it, if you are aware that you came from perfection, if you are aware that what you're playing is a game, because you see the trick behind, you would not try as hard. You need to be totally unaware in order on your, like I was saying, prodigal son. What is a prodigal son in a way? It's a son who went astray, who basically went very wrong, and everybody thought he's done. And this son, when he experienced all the worst possible, when he reached the level of so low that he couldn't go lower, there was only way up to go up. And in this process going up, he started to realize, looking back, how bad he really was. And he repented, he changed, and he came to his father. And father was smart enough to realize what happened, because he vindicated that love between him and father in spite of all this which existed between. While the other son loved the son, the father done everything for him all the time. Father knew he could not do against his will. He liked him. But to get a son who been so lost and on his own transform himself, that he realized without anybody, you know, telling him that that's the father, that's the link, that's more dear. And so when the soul, when the spirit goes through all these transformations and finally realize within itself all these victories, that finally reflects that the reunion is much more powerful than if I knew always that I'm a part of the soul which is perfect, I live forever. I would not try as hard. Life would be different. You see, we have to, on our own. The true growth in a spirit is to conquer. And you can only conquer if you do not know the outcome of that quest. You know, victory is sweet only if it is won. Never if it is given. And this is with everything. We have to, it's not easy. The darkness of the existence and the forces which trying to drag us down are so powerful that if you have even slightest awareness that life can be better if you have not tried and not even try to conquer and just stayed in a sort of a certain state, you would never do it. Like I said, I read a book once, the angels being able to see the spirit struggles on this planet are totally horrified when they see what the spirits in their ignorance have to go through in order to see that light when they transform themselves from the matter. That's called conquering spirit. You know, you start to see the true home. You start to see the true values. And these have to be transcended through trials and errors. If I tell you something, you would not listen. The son never heeds the advice of a father. If it is a younger spirit, it would only heed it if it happens to be older than the father. But it never heeds. You have to go through that experience. The experience is everything. I can tell you a million things, you will not listen until you do it, you know. And that's why every soul has to go through experience, you know. And when you experience it, you know. And until you experience it, you will always have your mind, which would sort of play with it any which way. But once you know, you know. So I would say, you know, we are sort of in a way a reflection of the divine breath, but we are not aware of it. If we were, we would not evolve. You know, you have to find your true home on your own. There are certain guideposts in it, but there are no really sort of sure shots, you know. That's why it is such a struggle. And that's why sort of victory is so sweet and in a way relatively so rare. In a way it's 100%, but it takes time. We never live long enough to realize it, you know. We meet very few people over.
What happens to the souls or spirits of people that are killed suddenly, like murdered or in car accidents or whatever? Like,
yeah.
Is there some kind of consciousness that
well, when people,
event or?
well, when the body is destroyed, the spirit is not anymore able to animate, but the spirit cannot be ever hurt, you know. You just sort of leave that body. It's like a car. You are driving the car and there is a smash up. Nothing happened to you. You walk out of that car, call insurance, and you don't worry too much about the car. You get a new one. The same is in relation to the spirit and body. If you think of the body being a car and the spirit inside is the driver, so the car gets smashed, you know, you walk out and eventually you get a new one. So there is no really there is no trauma or shock, you know. There might be a certain memories, you know, which can be very easily dealt with when you recognize that you are immortal. Because we don't know that. So when we sort of are going through the process of dying, you know, it's very different if you know that you are, and you can be conscious through that because you have developed that awareness and knowledge. As if you do not know, then you might screaming and all that stuff. But when you get on the other side, the realization of death is either instantaneous or it takes time. There are cases when the soldiers will be in a combat, on a battlefield, stabbing each other, and then they blow up into smithereens, both of them still carry on stabbing in each other in a spirit body, so to speak, and until they are, you know, told about what's going on, they might do so repeatedly, you know. If you study these books and communication, there it might be true, might be not, but I do incline to believe that this is how it is. It is the spirit, he has memory, experience, and all body never has it. When we say, well, when you have no consciousness, you are not aware of your body. The body is not aware of itself whatsoever. If I cut myself, you know, it's not the external which do the healing, it's internal. Energy comes from within. You can put any ointments, anything you want, you're just dressing the wound. It's the healing from within. And if that's not there, doesn't matter what you put on from outside, it would not work. And the same is with sort of a spirit. As long as the spirit is in, you know, the body functions. When the spirit is gone, that's it. So that's real. Body is never real. It's an illusion. That's why they call Maya this life and existence. Because as long as you live in a body and you are not aware that you are also spirit, that we are dual, that we are physical and spiritual, you would have that problem. And it's a hard concept to swallow in 2 hours talk, you know. I'm already 5 minutes over, yes.
Quickly, there's some thought that you are interacting with a sort of a soul group or a spirit group.
Yeah, that's it. That's what I was talking about, kindred soul. When the spirit comes to this planet, usually they are emitted from the number of souls. And when they come in the same time, there are even numbers given. Some spirits would say so many would come at certain intervals. This become then kindred souls. That's what I'm saying, because it's like a class. You go to a class, and you go a bunch of them go to the same class. And in some ways, being in the same process, you would have a certain affinity to each other. And when you meet, doesn't matter, you might have not even remembered each other and all, you have that affinity, you have something, you understand the same level, you remember that something will not happen. And when you have other classes which are either B or higher, it won't be the same. So the souls come in groups, and these groups would have then more affinity than, let's say, groups which are on a less level of embodiment, but at the end of the day, would all
incarnate or embody for a couple hundred years, then it's not likely that you're interacting with some spirit that was a relative of yours in a... No,
not at all. No, relative, to be a relative in a life, physical, is different to be kindred spirit in a soul, you know. Could be total stranger, as I said. You might have never met, so to speak, prior to it, might not know each other's language, might not, but you suddenly feel, you hear the story of that person, or you listen to him in translation, and you say, my God, he's speaking me. And you agree with everything, you have empathy, you feel good, because that, and like I said, that might be totally not related. At the same time, you might have relatives, and because they are of different sort of batch, so to speak, there is nothing between you on that level, and you never connect, because you might you might love to read books, and the guy likes to work in a gym, or whatever. You know, the physical, intellectual shall never meet. Morally and spiritually, you might be miles apart. And so it's become really complicated. I wish we had more time. I'm trying to put some sense into it within a very short time. Not only that, what I'm saying is first time I'm hearing, so I'm trying to listen myself to see what's going on and try to keep it going. So anyway, thank you very much for today.